Hello from Brooks River in Katmai National Park, Alaska. My name is Mike Fitz and I am a fellow with Explore.org and the Bear Cams this summer. I'm glad you can join me this evening. I will be doing a live play-by-play from Brooks Falls in just a few minutes, so please stand by. Welcome to Brooks River in Katmai National Park, Alaska. My name is Mike Fitz. I am a fellow with Explore.org and the Bear Cams in 2018. This is a live broadcast, and over the next hour I will be narrating the bear and salmon activity at Brooks Falls. This is a style of broadcast that I like to call a play-by-play. It's not too unlike watching a sporting event where the scenes that you're seeing are live. They're unscripted, and I will be discussing the bears, the behavior that they display. We'll be talking about salmon. There's a ton of salmon in the water right now, and really anything else that catches my attention. So we'll be looking upriver, we'll be looking downriver. If you're watching this on Facebook Live or you're watching this on Explore.org, I won't be monitoring the comments in those platforms for questions, but I hope to be able to answer as many of the common questions that you might be thinking of that come up during the next hour. So there's a lot of activity happening on the river right now. In front of me, 2 adult male bears. Just to quickly kind of pan downstream, there's a very large adult male in the water eating his fish. He's caught several fish over the last few minutes. And then looking downstream, there's a couple of bears that are sitting in the water. And that's an area that we call the riffles. And you can see one of them splashing down there trying to grab a salmon. I'll look down into this direction every once in a while. You can see there are other people on the wildlife viewing platform with me. So I'm standing about 12 feet off of the ground. If you're not familiar with this location, Brooks Falls is located about 300 miles southwest of Anchorage, Alaska. It's in the middle of Katmai National Park, one of the United States' largest national parks. And this is Independence Day, so what a great way to celebrate our Independence Day by observing the tremendous wildlife resources in our national parks. And I'm so thankful that Explore.org is generous enough to allow me to share this experience with you. So in the waterfall right down below us here is maybe the river's most dominant bear. And I say maybe, but it's quite likely. I haven't seen any other bears really challenge him or displace him this year. This is bear number 856. He's a very large adult male. He has wide set, sort of blonde ears, a lot of small scars and wounds around his neck and face, and those are from battling with other large adult males for access to food, fishing spots, females. He's excellent at fishing that plunge pool below Brooks Falls, and we nicknamed that spot the Jacuzzi. On the far side, standing in the water is number 83. He's also a large adult male, not nearly as dominant as 856. He'll consistently yield to 856. He also has a lot of wounds and scars around his neck and face, and that's fairly common for big adult males. At this time of the year when they're shedding their fur, we can really see a lot of those battle scars. These bears are competitors. Maybe we'll see some of that competition between them as they're looking to gain as many calories as they can before they enter winter hibernation. And just beyond him in the far pool is a younger adult male. He is in his, kind of approaching his early teens right now. He was born in 2006, and this is number 89 Backpack. So if these bears move around, we'll pay attention to that. We'll see how they interact with one another, and I'll try to describe maybe some of the things that I'm observing that will help you understand their behavior and why certain bears will yield to others, and others will feel confident enough to try to dominate a lot of these spaces up at Brooks Falls. 856 has caught several fish in the last 20 minutes or so, or less than that, since he's come down to Brooks Falls. The bears have been quite, satisfied with their meals today. There's a lot of salmon jumping. It's very easy for them to catch fish, and we're starting to see them actually select for the fattiest parts of the fish. And 856, he kind of lays in the water there. He turns away from us, so it's a little difficult to see what parts of the fish he's selecting for. He may eat the whole salmon. But when they're getting really, really full, they'll eat the skin, the brain, and the eggs. They'll look for the fattiest parts of the fish. And that's a behavior that is described as high grading. They're really looking for the high grade ore, so to speak. So instead of looking for the waste rock, they're looking for the gold. And for them, again, their currency is calories. And the skin and the brain and the eggs are so much higher in fat that it just allows them to gain more calories instead of filling their stomach up with salmon flesh. On the far side over here, number 89 has also caught a fish. 83 is eating a fish. Looks like 89 might want to exit the waterfall there, but there's a female that's standing in his way, and he's just decided, you know what, I'm just going to eat my fish right here. This female over there, I don't quite recognize. There are a lot of bears that come down the Brooks River that I don't know, so it's not uncommon. If you want to try to identify these bears with me this evening and you don't have the Bears of Brooks River identification guide, please download that off of Katmai's website, and you can find a link to that on the left side of the page as you scroll below the Bearcam feed on Explore.org. That female kind of exited the vicinity of 89, and she's walking a little bit downriver. So we'll see if she comes and gives us a better view of her later today. A lot of these bears, like I mentioned, probably will be satisfied. With their meals today. You can see there's a ton of fish jumping in the water, a few dozen per minute. And that plunge pool, where the water sort of boils up out of it, is really the only consistent place that can probably ride in those locations. We're going to get back to the salmon in a moment, but 856 moving to the far side right now. There's an adult female above the falls that moved in. She's avoiding the approach of 856. Number 83 vacated the premises. And you can see 89 on that far wall over there. He sees 856 too. When you're a big dominant bear like this, you have a reputation, and the other bears really do respect that. It's not worth it for them to challenge this big bear. He's very assertive. He walks through the river very confidently. Is a very typical dominant adult male. Really doesn't pay too much attention to what other bears are doing. He will, and when he does, he lets them know that he's the more dominant animal. As he's walking along, his ears are up. Ears are often forward, head is up. Number 89 still going down river and starting to move away a bit more rapidly. I'm wondering if 856 is maybe going to try to follow that female. Now that I'm looking at her, I'm not sure if it's a bear that's been identified as number 39. But the bear does at least superficially resemble that one. And number 39 is an adult female. She's had at least one litter. And this could be, you can see 89 just kind of step to the side there. He's going to let 856 cut into that dance. This is the tail end of the mating season. So 856 may be looking for, one of the last opportunities to mate and sire some offspring. And while they move downstream, we're going to pan back upriver because a new bear has entered the frame. And this is number 128 Grazer. She's a very blonde bear, very recognizable. Blonde ears even in the fall. She has a fairly straight profile, more sort of like black bear in profile or polar bear in profile. We don't have black or polar bears here in Katmai National Park. These are all brown bears. But their skull shape can vary considerably. Their faces do vary from one another. So when you're looking at these bears, you can look for those distinctive features. Blonde color, straight facial profile, and fishes the lip of the falls. Those are three really good indications that you're looking at 128. You can see how quickly she just caught that salmon. She's really skilled in that location, has had a lot of practice. A lot of the bears, when they catch fish on the lip of the falls, will move away just slightly, find a more secure position to eat their fish. Of course, the salmon will struggle as long as it can. I mean, they really do need to fight for their life in those situations. Of course, they can't really overpower the bear. The bears are much too strong for that. And she dropped her fish. The fish did flop away. You know, those injuries that it had might or look to be fatal. It may not die right away. I can actually see it in the water. I don't think the camera is going to be able to pick it up, but it did swim away, even with the significant portion of its skin torn off. And when bears catch their prey, they don't kill it before they start to consume it. They just subdue it. Now she looks like she's going to try the jacuzzi. There are not very many adult females that will fish in the jacuzzi. We were watching 856 in there just a little bit ago. 128 is much smaller than 856. And sort of, you can maybe notice that if you're comparing and contrasting as she walks across the river. Number 89 is also coming back to the waterfall. See those bears on the far side of the river, fairly tolerant of one another. Not like when 856 walked through, they both avoided one another. So each bear, again, they are individuals, their own dispositions, their own tolerances for not only, you know, their other bears as a population as a whole, but individual bears as well. They're very smart. They can recognize each other over days, seasons, and years. These bears have encountered one another before, likely when they come to Brooks Falls. 128 pouncing on another fish. This is an evening where they don't have to try very hard to catch their salmon. So when we do watch them eat the fish, they're going to be taking their time probably with it because food is so abundant. And now in that far pool as well, another bear coming down to the river. And you can see that bear on the right is having a slight staring contest with number 89. And they just avoided one another. The one coming down to the river right now is number 755. He is also a mature adult male in his teens. Typically fishes in that far pool. He'll come usually just no further than the middle of the river. And that looks like that's where he's going to head to right now. Number 128's up on top of the rock there, eating her fish. So using that just a bit as a dinner table. What I'm seeing this evening too is the sense of urgency that a lot of these bears were demonstrating or perhaps feeling. Of course, I can't get inside of their heads to really know for sure, but the urgency that they were demonstrating, eating the fish very, very quickly. Usually in each fish they were eating in less than 2 minutes. Just a few days ago, some bears I was timing would eat their fish in less than a minute, and these are again 4 to 7 pound sockeye salmon that they're fishing for. That same speed in trying to pack on or pack as many fish in their stomach as possible as quickly as they can is really not there right now. So their fishing strategies are a little less urgent. We're seeing the bears at the waterfall being patient like they were a few days ago, but also when they're eating the salmon, being a lot more selective. The salmon, you know, we often talk about them as a food source for bears, but they're in their own sort of competitive world. These are the last survivors of fish that spawned here, or the offspring of fish that spawned here 2 or 3 to 5 years ago on average. So probably a mixture of generations right here. Salmon are anadromous, and that means that they are born in freshwater, they go out into the ocean to grow large, and then they come back into freshwater to spawn and die. So this is a one-way journey for them. That waterfall, it's really hard to see how tall the waterfall is in that spot, but it's probably about 6 feet high where they're trying to leap. And you can see they're almost all of them are consistently coming out of the water right at the edge of where that water starts to boil back up. So they use that extra bit of hydraulic action to give them a boost. And as they're flying through the air, look closely at their tails. They're waving their tails rapidly. And they hit the water on the top side of the waterfall if they're lucky enough to leap in the right direction. They need to hit that water running. And so they're flapping their tails quite vigorously, and they hit that water, and then they need an extra surge of energy to get up and over that last force of flowing water before they can swim upstream. And this might be the last major obstacle that they face before they find their spawning grounds. Many of these fish will spawn in the upper Brooks River, but not until later in the summer. Most of them, however, will continue through Brooks River into Lake Brooks, which is the source of this water, and then spawn in the tributaries off of Lake Brooks. Not all salmon will make the leap. You can see most of these attempts are unsuccessful. Some of them will end up spawning down here. There are a lot of fish that will spawn downstream of Brooks Falls, but that doesn't mean necessarily that the fish downstream of the falls are somehow inferior of the fish that spawn upstream. In fact, most of the fish that spawn downstream of the falls just choose to spawn down here. They don't even try to leap the falls. So this is the right place for them. But it's interesting, if you ever have the opportunity to count how many fish are making the leap. Over the past several years, I've done that on a number of occasions and end up counting in total thousands of fish jumping. And then when I compare the number of fish during those exact same counts that make it, when I crunch the numbers, I found that about 8% of the jumps are successful. So what I think that means is that the fish have to jump multiple times to make it. And they've never encountered anything like this in their life. A lot of these fish were swept over the waterfall during their out migration to sea several years ago, but there's no other waterfall, there's no barrier like this that they have to experience on their upstream migration. So this is really the first time that they're experiencing it. It's not necessarily a very cold day in Brooks River. It's probably hovering around 60 degrees or so. It is very misty. The bears, one of the common questions that we get is how can they stay in the water for so long? They're just very large animals. So when you're a more massive body, you cool down a lot slower. The water is not warm. It's probably still in the 50s at this time of the year. It will warm up at the end of the month, sometimes into the 60s or so. But they don't seem to be affected by the cold water very much at all. I have seen what I perceive to be shivering from brown bears if they're sitting in the water for long periods of time, but not very often. Most of the time they seem to be quite warm and comfortable in it. And this is an adult female here that just walked down, splashed in the jacuzzi, caught a salmon. Let's see if she eats it right here. We might get a good look at that. Looks like she just wanted to get a better purchase on that salmon. Now this is a bear that I've been looking at over the past several days here, and this one I can't quite say who it might be. And that is not uncommon. Sometimes it takes me a while to figure out who's who. We also have over 2,000 brown bears in Katmai National Park, and new bears show up here at Brooks River every year. So while we know a lot of these individual bears very well, we see them year after year, we also see new bears arriving each season. Number 89 maybe moving over to try a different fishing spot. Some bears are very adaptable in their fishing locations. Some are specialists, they'll only fish in one spot, but when there's an opportunity to move to different places, they often do so. Sitting in the jacuzzi there, you have to have a little bit of size to you to hold your ground in that position. The force of the water really is trying to push them downstream. So the bigger you are, the easier it is for you to sit right in that spot. '89 is one of these bears that I think demonstrates a story of resiliency. I talk about this almost every time I see him. He was a fairly small yearling when I first observed him in 2007, and he also had a very pronounced limp. I couldn't tell what his leg injury was specifically. I don't know if he had broken bones or just a very severe sprain, but he limped for a significant period of time as a yearling in 2007. By the fall, he had healed through that. But before, we saw him healing, we would get a lot of comments from the visiting public talking about how we really needed to help this animal. Send him to a zoo at minimum. Some people even went as far to suggest that we euthanize him because he looked like he was in obvious pain. But bears in Katmai National Park are extremely tough animals, and one of the things that national parks protect is the hardships that they face. And now 89 was able to persevere through that pain and heal, and he is a growing adult male, and we're seeing him living the life of a successful wild bear right now. So we see the bears being successful, catching salmon, eating a lot of fish, having a lot of offspring. We also see some of the hardships that they face. You may see injured bears on the cams. You may see bears with wounds on them, scars from old wounds, of course, sometimes broken bones. I've seen bears here with broken jaws. And then last evening, we did have a cub that was killed downstream of Brooks Falls. It was not visible from the webcams, but that did happen. So this is a very difficult place for animals to live. The abundant food resources allow more bears to survive here than other areas without salmon. And you can see two of the bears in the background eating those fish. But that doesn't mean that they don't face a lot of other challenges. Challenges posed by other bears, challenges posed by the climate. So when you're watching them, you can think about the conflicts that they face and the challenges that they have to meet in order to survive and reproduce. And here's another bear that's walked up to the waterfall. We'll follow her for just a little bit, presuming it's a her. I'm not exactly sure. It can be difficult to tell the sex of bears, whether they're male or female. You can often see in adult males the important parts that would help you to differentiate between a boy and a girl. But that's not always visible. So what I like to look for in most cases is that for them to urinate. So females will urinate out behind them, and it's very easy to tell whether it's male or female if you're able to watch them urinate. But based on this one's overall size, looks like it could be just a young adult female. This is another bear again that I don't quite recognize. So we'll follow it for just a little bit, kind of see what its behavior might tell us about its experience here, its rank in the hierarchy. You can see it moving around, head up, ears forward. So Definitely not necessarily feeling threatened, but not moving very quickly either. Kind of twitching at some of the fish that it might feel bumping against it. You can see how those big claws might come in handy trying to pin a fish to the water. That's one of the big differences between brown bears and black bears. Black bears are the most common bear species in North America. The color of the animal isn't necessarily indicative of the species. There are brown black bears and there are very, very dark colored brown bears. But black bears have claws that are designed for climbing trees, much shorter, and brown bears have very long claws that are designed for digging. You can see even the gulls this evening looking pretty relaxed. They will fight with one another when food resources are not nearly as abundant. So bears eating a lot of fish, leaving a lot of fish scraps behind. So the gulls are able to find those very easily, satisfy their own meals. They do time their breeding cycle to coincide with the abundance of salmon here. So a lot of them probably have chicks that have just hatched and they're bringing back food to them. They nest on islands out in the lakes in this area. There's so much fish in the water right now. I really do have to think that each one of these bears has had a lot of salmon meals already today. Again, I talked about the urgency that we're not necessarily seeing in the animals. Sitting in the water, fish all around them, not trying very hard. So this is a big profitable day for them. In this entire watershed, the Naknek River watershed where we're standing at, about 500,000 sockeye salmon have gone up the river so far, in the Naknek River I should say, and we'll get about 20% of those fish in total. The escapement goals are about, at the end of the run, will probably be between 1 and 2 million fish. So if there are 1 million fish coming into Brooks River, we can expect, into Naknek River, we can expect about 200,000 to move through here. And another bear moving to the waterfall. This one I was watching before the broadcast as I was setting up. This is another adult female, one of the older adult females here. This is number 409 bead nose. I think she's probably approaching her late teens right now, if not closer to 20 years old. And she's pudgy. She's already starting to gain weight that she lost during hibernation. She was catching a half dozen fish in the half hour prior to the broadcast and then left, took her time eating one of those. She's not lunging at any of the fish. I think that's a product of not only her relative level of satiation, but she doesn't need to work very hard. She just needs to wait a few seconds for them to jump right into her mouth, as you can see there. And again, that's a difficult skill. We saw 128 do that, and we just saw 409 catch this fish by its tail. Does take a lot of practice. Last evening there were a couple of bears, and earlier today I think there were a couple of the same bears that went to that spot that didn't have as much experience as 409 does in that location. But that's again a 4 to 7 pound sockeye flying through the air. So you can imagine somebody throwing a fish at your face that's that large and asking you to catch it in your teeth. It'd be very difficult to do. But bears demonstrate a considerable amount of strength in many ways, and standing on the lip of the waterfall is one of the more considerable or conspicuous ways that they're doing that. And it's about halfway through the broadcast. And I'm going to reintroduce myself. My name is Mike Fitz. I'm a fellow with Explore.org in the bear cams in 2018. Very glad that you could join me. This is July 4th, 2017, and I'm standing on a wildlife viewing platform next to Brooks Falls in Katmai National Park. Katmai National Park is located about 300 miles southwest of Anchorage, Alaska. Edna's really taking her time with that fish. Eating quite a bit more of it than I expected. I thought we would see her leave more of the fish, but certainly not eating the whole thing, at least not very rapidly. Bears are quite dexterous with their claws. Let me see if I can zoom in just a little bit further and give you a look at that. Looks like she's trying to turn that around, trying to eat, most of the skin if she can. The brain is also a very fatty part of the fish, so we'll usually see the bears try to eat the brain. They almost never ignore that. Now it looks like, she has the head. Just let it go. And to maybe try to pull off a few more of the choice pieces. She's standing in a fairly typical posture. For bears eating salmon in the water, they'll often hold it against one arm. And if you're here walking along some of the trails near Brooks River, and if a bear's been by or there's an area where a bear has been napping and it's moved on, and you walk by recently after it's gone, you can smell sort of a wet dog, a combination of wet dog and fish slime smell. So they're really, they are in the water a lot, but they're often covered in sort of fish gore. So then that scent sort of follows them into the forest as they're resting. And back to the waterfall for 409. Zoom out. We have a bunch of bears at the waterfall right now. So number 409 on the lip again. Number 89 in the jacuzzi below her. Number 755 just downstream of those rocks. A adult female that I don't recognize off the top of my head. And again, she's been around for the past several days. And I did talk to the bear monitor about her, and she didn't recognize that bear right away either. And then to the left of those bears, up closer to the waterfall, is number 128 Grazer. And then downstream of her on that far side is number 503, who is a very young adult male, to kind of just turned adult this year. He's a bear that's learning to fish the waterfall in a lot of different locations. He'll try the far pool. We saw him last fall, actually in the jacuzzi, quite a bit. And the jacuzzi is one of those more productive fishing locations. So if he's able to sort of master that, and he's able to grow big enough into a size where he can compete with the adult males that love to fish in that location, then that could be a very successful spot for him. Will allow him to gain, greater size, greater strength, more fat reserves to fuel his pursuit of females in the future, in the springtime during their mating season. We'll take a look at this adult female standing down here again. This is the one again that I don't recognize off the top of my head. And that's okay. When I see bears that I don't recognize, I just try to watch its behavior, try to determine whether it's an adult, a younger bear, whether it's male or female. This bear's behavior, though, does indicate that it has a lot of familiarity with Brooks River. So I suspect it's probably been seen here before, and it's just one that that I'm just not that familiar with. This bear has a fairly distinctive, narrow-pointed muzzle. Resembles a bit of, now that I look at her, of 813, who I'm not sure was identified last year during our monitoring sessions. But we do have biological technicians here and biologists that go through, that stand at the river in certain locations during certain times to monitor the brown bears. They'll record what bears they see. They'll take photographs of them. And to get it's a long-term monitoring study to understand the dynamics of the animals here at Brooks River. And I will be interviewing actually the park's wildlife biologist, Leslie Scora, next week. So please tune in for that. We'll be doing a live chat with Leslie, and we'll talk about bear research here in Katmai. So again, this female looks like she's familiar with Brooks Falls, but hasn't really gone down and set herself into any one fishing spot. She seems to be moving around a little bit, maybe looking for scraps. Not all adult bears know how to fish at Brooks Falls. Each one of these locations takes practice. You have to know how to fish the far pool. You have to know how to fish near the rocks. You have to know how to fish the jacuzzi. You have to know how to fish the lip. On that far side, 128 has a fish. Again, standing on a rock, using that as a bit of a tabletop, just a little bit more comfortable and easier for her to chew on that salmon. She's also high grading. You can see a lot of that flesh is left behind. She's taking her time with it. And now this behavior too might only last a day or so. Bears are quick to get hungry again. They're going to try to fit in as many calories as they can anytime abundant food is available. But tomorrow, for instance, there might not be many salmon jumping the falls, and we may see the bears eat the whole fish and not leave any behind. So they do live in a feast or famine world. But today is one of those days where it is a big, almost Thanksgiving day for them. So far more food than they can eat. And for the salmon itself, that is perhaps a strategy to overwhelm their predators. When they're coming into these watersheds in just huge numbers, there's so many fish that the predators can't eat them all. So even though many bears are intercepting salmon and eating them, there's so many that many will escape to survive another day and spawn. And you see this in salmon. There's other examples of this in the natural world. I can think of cicadas as another example that's quite common in North America. So maybe you're living in an area in the lower 48 right now that has a hatch of cicadas, and you can hear them buzzing in the trees. So those hatch all at once because they overwhelm the birds that like to feed on them. So there are so many cicadas that all the birds get full and they can't eat them all, so some will survive to reproduce. And we're seeing sort of the same phenomenon with our sockeye salmon here. 99% of the salmon that you see in Brooks River are sockeye salmon. We do have 4 other species of anadromous fish. We'll have, in decreasing abundance, sockeye, silver, also called coho salmon, pink salmon, chump salmon, and then even a few king salmon that will enter Brooks River. But the vast majority of them are sockeye. Number 409 on the lip there, again, taking her time with the fish. So this is the second one that she's caught since she came back into view not that long ago. And she caught at least 5 or 6 before we started the broadcast. Heading right back to that spot. I love watching these bears walk up to the edge of the waterfall. Again, we were talking about the strength of them when they're trying to stand there, catch fish in their mouth. It's a lot of water that's trying to, that's acting, against them. They have to stand and hold themselves there. She's right on the edge. She can't really move up any further. And that's really, look at that posture she has. That is a diagnostic stance by number 409 Bead Nose. She often holds one paw in the air. She's not injured. That just seems to be a habit that she has. Just sometimes swat at the water if she, almost like she's feeling, I don't want to say she's frustrated, but it almost looks like that sometimes when she's not catching as many fish. Younger bears, when they move up to the edge of the falls and they try to fish this position, are much more hesitant, and for good reason, to walk all the way to the edge of the water. And I've been on top of the waterfall. It's difficult to stand in that location. I've actually never moved to the spot where she is in right now because I've always been a little wary of slipping and falling into the plunge pool below. So I respect her sort of skill and confidence in that location. So 1, 2, 3, 4 bears at the waterfall downstream. Several bears too. A couple of us, or a couple bears closer to us. We look downstream here. This is an area called the Riffles. One bear sitting in the water there. This looks like perhaps number 151. But I could be mistaken about that. I'll have to use my binoculars and hold the camera steady at the same time. But I can walk and chew gum, folks. Don't worry. Yeah, that bear's a little too... I can't quite tell who it might be, but definitely seems to most often or most closely resemble 151 down there, but I could be mistaken about that, so don't take it as 100% truthful. And bears will fish the riffles. Sometimes we'll see these bears in that location charging through the water, chasing salmon. When the salmon are really abundant, the bears can afford to sit there and just kind of be more patient with it. But that's a spot more often than not where bears have to use an active fishing strategy. Waiting for the fish maybe to swim by and then trying to jump on them or chase them through the water. Number 409 with yet another fish. Not unsurprising. It's a fairly big sockeye that she has. Look how she's eating it, stripping the skin off first. If you've ever tried to fillet a salmon, you know that you need a pretty sharp knife to do it. So again, another demonstration of strength. She can just bite into that and easily tear it off. You're looking at this bear. Not only is her fishing style on the lip a little distinctive, with that raised paw that she likes to hold in the air, Identifying her physically is also fairly easy. Very blonde, large fluffy ears. You can see that salmon there still moving, still struggling. And this is definitely a classic example of high grading. Stripping the skin off. Now she's moving to the head. That might have been finally the killing bite after all of that. Again, 409 really taking her time with that salmon. Definitely demonstrating that she is full this evening. Doesn't need the whole fish. Doesn't need to waste stomach space on less caloric parts like the salmon flesh. Sometimes you'll see bears strip the skin off so skillfully that it looks like a nice fillet floating downstream, like you would almost pick it up and put it on your grill. Just as a matter of full disclosure, I have never done that. Other bears here are eating their fish. Number 755 kind of in the middle there downstream of the rocks. Turning away from us, he has a salmon. .409 drop most of that fish down into the water below. There is again a smaller bear here, and I'm not sure if it's going to be able to see that and pick it up. It may have been swept downstream out of its line of sight. And there it is right now. You can see that it finally caught sight of it. So younger bears, you know, if they're able to hover around the fringes of the waterfall, can make a living just by looking for those leftovers on very abundant days like today. So sometimes you'll see young bears, especially smaller bears, at Brooks River not catching a lot of fish on their own at this time of the year, because the best fishing spots are dominated by larger bears that they can't compete with. But on days like today, when the river is really flooded with salmon, it's easy for them to make a living. You can see there are fewer fish jumping right now compared to the beginning of the broadcast. The salmon do move in the river, through the river in waves. It's not uncommon when I'm up here to, start counting fish. When I visit the falls in the evening, and I might see just a few salmon jumping, or I may see a lot of salmon jumping. But by the end of my stay over several hours, I might see the opposite, where if there were a ton of salmon jumping, maybe dozens per minute or more, then 3 hours later there might be just one or two fish. And the catch rate for these bears right now is definitely going down. So if you are a bear, again, you got to be opportunistic, and you got to take advantage of those situations when they present themselves. I can't really imagine the profound hunger that they feel living a life where you have to eat a year's worth of food in 6 months or less. It's just not something that I think humans can conceive or feel in the same way that brown bears do. In the fall, the switch that tells them that they're full gets turned off, so they really never feel full in the fall. and that's a stage in their annual life called hyperphagia. They're not quite at that now, even though they are gorging on salmon. But that we'll see that in September and October, where they will just continue to eat and eat and eat, and if they're not eating, basically all they're doing is sleeping. Bears sitting in the jacuzzi and standing on the lip, though, do decrease the success rate of salmon jumping. Not only the number of fish jumping, but the actual successful leaps themselves. So a lot fewer salmon will jump the fall successfully when bears are in these positions. You know, 409 standing right in a spot where a lot of salmon will make the leap. They'll hit the water right there. So that's why she's standing there, because she can reach down with her mouth and grab them. But that blocks one of their avenues upriver. There's another spot just on the opposite side of her where salmon can hit the water and keep going. But very few other places. I'm going to pan downstream for a moment from our cast of characters here at the falls and take a look at this adult female down here. This again might be number 39, I am not sure. Number 39 has had 2 litters. Fairly blonde, fairly wide set ears. A lot of bear that I see at Brooks Falls very often. Bears use the river in different ways. Some of them are skilled at fishing downstream. A lot of the big adult males love to fish up at Brooks Falls just because it's such a productive area, and it would be so for all bears. But when in the bears world, it's pretty much an all for one world outside of the bond between a mother and cubs. So bears don't give each other any breaks, and they're not. When they're hungry, they're not going to allow other bears the opportunity to stand at the waterfall and fish in those exact same spots. We will see as July progresses, though, we will see the bears feeling a bit more tolerant towards one another. So the aggressive interactions that these bears show early in July are the potential for those is still there later in the month, but the frequency of them really does decrease. I think that's a product of them getting full, and it's also a product of them being tolerant of one another. They're just more familiar, and they know who's who. They know which bears are more dominant, which bears they need to yield to if you're a subordinate bear. And another one for 409.